Have you ever felt like you're constantly running, but never getting anywhere? As if your life were a conveyor belt at most, requiring all your effort just so you don't fall, but without taking you forward. That was my reality. I believed with all my soul that speed was synonymous with success, until exhaustion taught me a lesson that changed everything. It wasn't until I ignored the rush that I finally started to move forward. The secret was not in what I needed to add to my life, but in what I needed to have the courage to subtract from her. From an early age, we are trained for speed. The child who finishes the test first, the professional who answers the email faster, the company that launches the product before the competition. We live under the tyranny of now, for yesterday. Haste has become a badge of honor, a sign that we are important, busy, indispensable. And I, like so many of us, internalized that belief as an absolute truth, a secular gospel that dictated every minute of my day. But why do we fall into this trap? Looking back, I realized that it's not just a matter of time management, it's a matter of validation. Our culture has built a dangerous equation. Being busy equals being important. The busy schedule has become a status symbol. In conversations with friends or colleagues, there was almost a veiled competition to see who was more tired, who had slept less, who had more projects. Saying, "I'm exhausted," was a way of saying, "My life is full and relevant." Rest, on the other hand, was viewed with suspicion, as a sign of laziness or lack of ambition. And the fear of being seen as lazy, as someone who stayed behind, was a powerful engine that kept me running, even without knowing where. Added to this, we live in the era of fear of being out of the loop, the famous FOMO. Social networks have become an endless showcase of other people's achievements. With each scroll on the feed, I saw someone traveling, starting a business, finishing a master's degree, having a child. That created a constant feeling that I wasn't doing enough. The success of others felt like a reminder of my own failure, and my knee-jerk reaction was, accelerate. Take more courses, accept more projects, fill every gap in my schedule to prove, to the world and to myself, that I was also in the game. I didn't realize that I was trying to win a race that didn't have a finish line, against competitors who only showed their best moments. My life has become a work of art of optimization, a symphony of urgency. Waking up was the starting gun. Before my feet even touched the ground, my hand was already reaching for the cell phone on the bedside table, diving into an ocean of notifications, emails, and news. Breakfast was swallowed standing up, while I mentally organized the insurmountable to-do list of the day. The shower was my learning time, with a podcast at 2x speed echoing in the bathroom. I convinced myself that I was being efficient, but the truth is that I absorbed almost nothing. The information passed through me, but it didn't. Traffic was a battlefield against the clock. Every red light was a personal affront, every slow driver an obstacle to my imaginary I arrived at work with my heart racing, diving headlong into a fragmented workday. Meetings spliced into each other, multiple tabs open on the computer, 15-minute lunches in front of the screen. My brain jumped from one task to another like a frightened monkey, never delving into anything. I prided myself on multitasking, not realizing that I was actually just multi-superficial. I confused movement with direction. He thought that because he was always panting, he was inevitably getting closer to some extraordinary place. The busy schedule was my trophy. A weekend without commitments was a sign of failure, of irrelevance. So I filled it with courses, networking events, social engagements that drained more than nourished. I was addicted to the feeling of being busy because the stillness scared me. In the silence, I might have had to face the most terrifying question of all, running so much to get where. The problem is that haste has an invisible but devastating cost. It robs us of depth. When we run, we see the landscape as a blur. We don't notice the details, the nuances, the opportunities that lurk in stillness. We make reactive, unconsidered decisions. We solve problems superficially, creating bigger ones in the future. Our relationships become transactional, marked by quick check-ins rather than genuine connection. Haste turns us into excellent executors of urgent tasks, but into poor architects of a meaningful life. I am reminded of a micro-story that perfectly illustrates this trap. I was leading an important project at work, and the pressure for a quick release was immense. The board wanted to be the first in the market. This phrase, "be the first," echoed in the corridors like a mantra. In a planning meeting with colorful post-its covering the walls, the discussion was not about quality, but about speed. How can we cut corners? What is good enough for us to launch? I remember a junior engineer, a quiet, bright guy, raising his hand and saying, "If we don't test this integration for another 2 weeks, we run a serious risk of cascading failure." The room was silent for a second, and the senior manager replied with a patronizing smile, We appreciate the caution, but we don't have time to be perfectionists. That phrase sealed our fate. We adopted the task force mentality. We work nights and weekends, fueled by coffee, pizza, and the promise of a generous bonus. The atmosphere was one of euphoria and trench camaraderie. We skipped research steps that seemed like luxury, ignored the small concerns that felt like pessimism, and cut corners to meet a deadline that was actually arbitrary. We launched the project 2 weeks ahead of schedule. On the day of the launch, there was champagne, congratulatory emails from top management, pats on the back. We feel the adrenaline rush of victory, the intoxicating feeling of having won the race. 2 weeks later, the house began to crumble. First, an important customer reported a problem, then another. Within a week, the cascading failure that the young engineer had predicted had become a catastrophic reality. The system was unstable, the data corrupted. The celebratory mood gave way to a silent panic. We spent the next 6 months not innovating, not creating the next product, but in a crisis management purgatory. We had to fix the mistakes that our own haste had created, dealing with angry customers and a demoralized team. The most painful was the lessons learned meeting. The cost of repairing the mistake was 3 times higher than the cost of doing it right the first time. That shortcut turned out to be the longest, most expensive and humiliating path we could have taken. It was a brutal lesson. By trying to gain 2 weeks, we lost 6 months, millions in revenue, and most importantly, the trust of our audience. This experience was a mirror for my personal life. I was doing the same thing with my health, my relationships, my dreams. With my health, I lived on credit. I skipped lunch to finish a report, promising myself that I would eat something healthy in the evening, which never happened. He slept 5 hours a night, believing that coffee would make up for the deficit. I ignored my body's signals, the back pain, the migraine, the gastritis, as if they were minor inconveniences, not urgent warnings from an overloaded system. In relationships, the rush was even more cruel. I remember having dinner with my partner, one of the rare nights we had together. While he was telling me about his day, I had my phone discreetly next to my plate, answering emails from work. He stopped talking mid-sentence. I looked up, not understanding. He said with a calm sadness, "You're not here, are you?" That sentence hit me like a punch. He was right. My body was on the table, but my mind was miles away, stuck on the next task. How many important conversations have I missed? How many moments of connection have I sacrificed on the altar of productivity? Even my passions became chores. I loved to read, but the books on my bedside gathered dust. Instead, I read online summaries so I could say I knew what it was about. I loved cooking, but I started to live off food by app because I didn't have time. The joy, the pleasure, the activities that fed the soul were the first to be cut, considered non-essential in my life spreadsheet. I was building an impeccable resume and an empty life. The great turning point was not a moment of glorious epiphany, but a quiet, gradual collapse. It started with the physical symptoms that I ignored for months: a persistent insomnia, constant headaches, a feeling of mental fog that made me forget simple things. Then came the emotional impact. I felt strangely disconnected from everything and everyone. I was at a birthday party of a good friend, surrounded by people I loved, and the only thing I could feel was a deep emptiness. Joy felt like a foreign language that I could no longer understand. The breaking point was a rainy Tuesday. I was in my car, stuck in traffic, on my way to another meeting for which I was late. The phone kept vibrating. The radio spoke of another economic crisis, and suddenly I couldn't breathe properly anymore. My heart raced, my hands went cold, and a wave of panic washed over me. It wasn't a heart attack. It was my body and soul screaming in unison. Enough! There, in the middle of the traffic jam, with the horn of the other cars as a soundtrack, I broke down crying. It was not a cry of sadness, but of absolute exhaustion. The exhaustion of someone who tried to be everything to everyone and ended up being nothing to herself. It was at this rock bottom that the first seed of change was planted. The honest acknowledgement that my method wasn't working. On the outside, I looked like the image of success. Inside, I was in ruins. The speed wasn't getting me to the top of the mountain. It was making me run in circles at the base, more and more tired. The first step, and perhaps the hardest, was to give myself permission to slow down. This sounds simple, but it goes against everything our culture preaches. Slowing down seems like an act of rebellion. It takes immense courage to, in a world that screams faster, whisper to oneself, more calmly. I started with a radically simple experiment. The day after the car collapsed, I decided to make the commute to work without turning on the radio, without listening to podcasts, without answering calls. Just me and the sound of the engine. The first 10 minutes were torture. My mind, accustomed to this bombardment, went into abstinence. My hand itched to pick up the cell phone. A flood of anxious thoughts came over me. You should be planning. You're meeting, you're wasting time. What if there's an emergency? It was my addiction to urgency talking, but I persisted. I focused on my breathing, and then something started to change. In the absence of external stimuli, I began to notice the outside world with a clarity I hadn't experienced since childhood. The color of the leaves on the trees, the architecture of a building that I passed by every day and had never noticed. And more importantly, I began to listen to my own inner voice. I realized how tense my body was. I noticed concerns that I had been pushing under the rug. I had a simple but clear idea about how to solve a problem at work. That silence was not empty. It was the space my soul needed to breathe. For the first time in years, I didn't arrive at work already exhausted from the journey. I arrived calmer. I arrived more present. That calmer arrival at work, after my little experiment of silence in the car, was the first glimmer of light in a room I didn't even know was so dark. It was the first concrete evidence that my exhaustion was not an inevitable condition of modern life, but the result of a choice. The choice to live at a pace that was not my own. That small victory gave me the courage to question. If I could change the quality of my route, what else could I change? Encouraged, I decided to bring this philosophy indoors, to the epicenter of my nighttime anxiety. I created a new challenge, something that seemed almost ridiculous because it was so simple, the tea ritual. The rule was clear. During the 10 minutes it took me to prepare and drink a cup of tea before bed, I would do absolutely nothing else. No cell phone, no television, no planning the next day in my head. Just me, the water, the leaves, and the cup. Sounds easy, doesn't it? It was one of the hardest battles I've ever fought with myself. On the first night, as the water warmed in the kettle, my body vibrated with a restless energy. My brain, addicted to stimuli. You could be washing that last dish. Reply to that message that arrived before the person thinks you're ignoring them. Take one last look at the emails, just to make sure there's no urgency. The urge to pick up the cell phone was almost physical, an itch in the palm of the hand, a reflex conditioned by years of practice. I sat with the hot cup in my hands and felt absurdly unproductive, as if I was wasting precious seconds of life. But just like in the car, I persisted. I focused obsessively on the details of the ritual as a way to anchor my wandering mind. The subtle sound of water starting to boil, the steam rising from the cup in spirals, the aroma of chamomile loosening into the hot water, the comforting weight of pottery in my hands. Each time my mind raced to a worry, I brought it back gently to the sensation of the warmth, to the smooth taste of the tea. It was a bodybuilding exercise for my attention muscle, which was completely atrophied. On the third or fourth night, the magic happened. The mental noise, which was once a scream, became a whisper. And in place of anxiety, a feeling of simple and deep pleasure emerged. I was just there, present in my own body in my own kitchen. That small act of single tasking, of doing a single thing with full attention, was revolutionary. He taught me that my mind was like a puppy that I had never trained. She ran everywhere, barking at everything, and I had to teach her, gently and patiently, to sit down and calm down. This attention training began to spill over into other areas. If silence gave me space and the tea ritual taught me about presence, the next frontier was my work environment. Inspired by the disaster of the rushed project, I decided to apply the antidote, deep work. I started blocking out 2 hours in my schedule, 3 times a week, as if they were the most important meeting in the world. The title of the event was Focused Work. During this block, I closed the door to my office, closed all the browser tabs that were not essential, closed the email program and put the cell phone in airplane mode, stored inside the drawer. At first, it was chaos. The culture of constant interruption was the norm, and my unavailability seemed like an affront. My colleagues didn't understand. People were knocking on my door. The messages in the company's chat piled up. In the early days, I felt immense guilt, a fear that I was missing out on something important, that I would be seen as someone who doesn't play as a team. But I kept the border with gentleness and firmness. I'm in a focused work block right now. Can we talk at 11 a.m.? Gradually, people learned my rhythm. The most counterintuitive finding was that the less I did, the more I accomplished. In those 6 hours of focused work per week, I produced more significant results than in the other 34 hours of shallow, reactive, interrupted work. My texts became clearer, my strategies better thought out, my solutions to complex problems more creative. I stopped being a firefighter who only put out fires and became an architect who designed systems to prevent the fire from starting. The quality of my thinking has changed. I was able to connect ideas, to see patterns that were previously invisible in the middle of the rush. This led me to the most powerful and frightening lesson of all, the art of saying no. My hurried life was built on a foundation of automatic yeses. Yes to the project that didn't excite me, yes to the invitation that didn't interest me, yes to the meeting that could have been an email. Each yes was an attempt to please, to be seen as helpful, not to create conflict. But I learned that every yes we give to others without conviction is a no we give to ourselves. It is a no to our rest, to our personal projects, to our sanity. My first conscious no was terrifying. A director in another department, an influential person in the company, asked me to take over a task force that would consume at least 10 hours of my week. The project was visible. It had prestige. But it wasn't aligned with my strategic priorities, and honestly, it didn't inspire me at all. The me of old would have said yes in the blink of an eye, already imagining future burnout, but consoling herself with the visibility she would gain. But the new me asked for time to think. That night I made a list. What were my 3 most important priorities for that quarter? Where would my energy bring the most results? The task force was not in any of these answers. The next day, with my heart in my mouth and the script rehearsed in my mind, I went to his office. I took a deep breath and said, "Thank you so much for thinking of me for this opportunity. I am honored by the trust. However, for this quarter, my full focus is on ensuring the success of projects X and Y, which are crucial to our goal. To do this with the excellence they deserve, I need to decline new commitments. Unfortunately, I will not be able to participate." The silence on the other side of the table lasted an eternity. I waited for anger, disappointment, maybe a mental note to harm me in the future. But what came was a look of respect and a simple, "Understood. It's a shame, but I admire your clarity and focus. Thank you for your honesty." That was it. The world has not ended. I wasn't fired. And the feeling that came over me was of a power and a self-respect that I had never felt before. That no was not an act of selfishness. It was an act of strategic clarity. It was the declaration that my time and energy were finite and precious resources, and I was the sole guardian responsible for them. That's when I started to think of my life as a garden. The inexperienced gardener believes that a beautiful garden is a full garden, and he goes out planting everything he finds, one plant on top of another. The result is a suffocating chaos, where nothing has room to grow properly, where plants compete for light and nutrients. The wise gardener, however, knows that the secret is curation. He knows that pruning is as important as planting. It removes weeds, the tasks that drain without adding value. He pulls out the flowers that have already died, the projects that no longer make sense. And sometimes you even need to remove a healthy plant that's in the wrong place so that the most important ones can fully flourish. Pruning is not an act of destruction. It is an act of creation. My life needed pruning. The no's became my gardening sheet. I began to prune commitments, projects, superficial relationships, and even habits of thought. And by creating space, something miraculous began to happen. In the fertile soil of not doing, creativity began to sprout. My best ideas didn't come when I was straining my brain in front of the computer, but in the moments of emptiness, in the shower on an aimless walk through the park, in those minutes looking out the window with my cup of tea. Haste and constant busyness are enemies of inspiration. The muse of creativity only visits us when we are quiet enough to hear her whisper. This journey of slowing down was not a straight line. There were relapses. I remember a specific week, about 6 months after this change began. A major competitor launched an innovative product, and my company went into panic mode. The old urgency has returned with full force. Emergency meetings, late-night emails, the pressure to respond fast, and I fell back into the old pattern. I abandoned my focus blocks, skipped my tea rituals, started eating lunch at my desk again. By the end of that week, I was physically ill. A terrible migraine left me bedridden for 2 days. It was there, in the dark of my room, that I noticed the big difference. Before, that state of exhaustion was my normal. Now, he was a deafening alarm. My body and mind, now accustomed to a healthier pace, refused to operate at that level of stress. The relapse was not a failure. It was the most powerful confirmation that the new path was the right one. I've learned that the discipline of slowing down is most necessary just when the outside world is screaming at you to speed. The biggest transformation, however, was internal. My definition of success has completely changed. Success was no longer about the amount of things I crossed off the to-do list, but about the quality of my presence in each of them. Success wasn't a zeroed inbox at midnight, was to close the laptop at 6 in the afternoon to have a dinner present with my family. Success wasn't a busy schedule of networking events. It was a Sunday morning with no plans, reading a book for pure pleasure. Success has ceased to be a measure of external productivity and has become a measure of internal peace. I discovered the most liberating paradox of all. By doing less, I became more valuable. My contribution became more impactful. My relationships deepened because when I was with people, I was genuinely present. My health improved because I was finally listening to my body. The peace I found was not the absence of challenges, but the presence of wholeness. I was no longer fragmented, running in 1,000 directions. I was unified, walking in one direction only, at my own pace. The most profound lesson that life has taught me was this. The secret to going further is not in speeding up the pace, but in having the clarity to find the right path and the courage to walk on it calmly and wholeheartedly. Speed is an illusion of progress. True advancement happens in depth, intention, and presence. The success you seek doesn't require you to do more. It requires you to do less, but do it with excellence, intention, and love. Today, I invite you to do a little experiment. Not a radical change, but an act of silent rebellion against the culture of hate. Choose a single activity in your daily routine. It can be drinking your coffee, brushing your teeth, walking from the car to the front door. And for just that week, decide to do it unhurriedly, with full attention, as if it were the only thing that matters in the world. Observe what happens in your mind and body. Observe the resistance, and then observe the peace that can arise. If this reflection gave you the permission you needed to breathe, to free yourself a little from the tyranny of urgency, subscribe to the channel and leave your like. It helps keep these essential conversations alive and connects us to more people who are also seeking a more sustainable and meaningful way of living.